Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Case file number 138, written by Hammy T42, a falling date that dictated fate. Yeah, I think this may have been my first glitch in the Matrix, and I'm really still freaked out about it. So basically, I was in the kitchen, getting something from the fridge, when my dad out of nowhere asks, "Hey, what just dropped?" I'm confused because I didn't hear anything fall, so I ask him what he means. He says he definitely heard something fall, and asked me what it was. I'm still trying to figure out what he was talking about, when suddenly, a date pit goes flying off the kitchen counter right in front of me. I literally saw the full event unfold. It flew off the kitchen counter and landed on the ground right at my feet. I'm really weirded out by the whole situation. Not sure I can think of a reasonable explanation for how my dad randomly predicted something falling off the counter just to see it happen a few seconds after. Edit. Okay, so seeing the amount of responses I've gotten on this post, I'd like to clarify some things. 1. I was alone in the kitchen when this happened. Dad was in the living room, which is directly across from the kitchen. He was facing the other way watching TV. There was a box of dates, but they were on a separate shelf. It's an island kitchen, so there's one countertop shelf in the middle, and the box of dates were on the outside shelves. 2. It was a single pit from a date, which randomly popped into existence. It wasn't on the counter before because I wiped some crumbs off the countertop, and I would have knocked it off if it was there to begin with. 3. When I say popped into existence, I really do mean it. I saw it jump off the shelf, and I tracked its motion until it hit the floor. Case notes, file number 138. So has this ability ever manifested itself for your dad before? The date pit appeared from nowhere, so it's not just foresight, predicting a future event. Your dad saw a potential future, but by interacting with the past differently than how he saw it in his vision of said future, it prevented you from eating a date and placing the pit on the counter, which you then would accidentally have knocked over, again, in that potential future. So in a nutshell, by seeing it, he changed that vision of the future. But then how did the pit come to be in the original timeline when you never ate the date? Trippy. Case file number 139, written by Roward62867. Brothers bonded by strife, suddenly given closure from the afterlife. My brother Kenny and I were always close. He was a little over a year older than me. He and I were adopted as babies. Our mother had tuberculosis but died in a car crash. We were the only children she had. We are also of the Northern Arapaho tribe. We were adopted by a white family and taken away from the reservation. We grew up not knowing about our culture and our language. Also, growing up in a white world, away from the reservation, we always felt a bit lost. We never saw ourselves as different from everyone else, but sadly, everyone else saw us different from them. We never really talked about it, but it always was there. I'm happy to say that I am back with the Arapaho people, and I've learned my culture and I'm learning my language too, hard as it may be, but I digress. Despite being very close, we also fought a lot, maybe more than most brothers do. I can remember having some really good knockdown dragouts with him as kids. As we grew into adulthood, we had a few more fights, but it ended after we both joined the military. I was in the army and he was in the Marine Corps. I suppose being in uniform matured us and we became much closer. A friendship developed between us that I can't really explain. I imagine other siblings who read this will understand what I'm talking about. Desert Storm came along and the whole world was watching. Kenny was deployed to Kuwait, and I was waiting for my orders to go. I was in Germany at that time, and he was in San Diego. He was a combat engineer. I was in field artillery, but assigned to a headquarters battery, working in brigade operations at that time. I was taken away from that and assigned to do guard duty for civilian housing there in Augsburg. It was January in Germany, so it was very cold. Standing for 12 hours at a time in the snow took a toll on me, and I ended up with trench foot, and later on, a condition known as cellulitis, a blood infection that was slowly killing me. Even still, my first sergeant came to visit me and handed me orders for the desert. I spent many weeks in the hospital. My doctor's name, ironically, was Major Burden. When my feet healed, I was discharged and the war was already winding down. Luckily, I didn't have to go. My brother did though, and he came back a shattered man. Before the war, he was training to be a marathon runner, and he had even carried the Olympic torch in the late 80s before joining the Marine Corps. Now he could barely walk across the room without wheezing. That war had destroyed him. He began drinking very heavily. Sometimes he drank so much, I thought it would kill him. But it didn't. It went on for years, and we all tried to help him get over it, but he just couldn't. He would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Sometimes he would take off walking and be gone for days. One day, he finally went to the VA hospital and entered a rehab program. I was so happy to see that he was finally getting help. He stuck with it until just a few days shy of graduating. Then he left. The hospital called and called, trying in vain to get him to come back and finish the program, but he didn't. He felt he was on the road to recovery, and he did very well with sobriety for a long time. Then, just like that, he started drinking again. This time it was much worse than before. He couldn't hold down a job, and all of us in the family did what we could to help him, but to no avail. All we could do was watch him drink himself to death. Even though he wasn't working, he'd still find ways of getting alcohol. One night he was out with two men. I won't call them friends because he hardly knew them. They were driving on a country road in the northeast part of Wyoming. Their truck broke down, and according to these two dickheads, Kenny went to find help. Kenny was found the next morning, face down in the snow with his hands in his pockets, 14 miles off the nearest road, dead from below freezing temperatures and exposure. I was still in the army at the time. I was on a field exercise when I got word. I came straight home, and the bottom fell out of my world. I was devastated beyond belief. I prayed to God for me to switch places with him, but it never happened. I had a hell of a time getting back on track with my life. The closest relative I ever had was now gone, and I had never felt so alone. Weeks turned into months and then to years. I got out of the army and I had moved from house to house, finally settling into a little 2-bedroom apartment. I had a decent job and I was making enough money to get a phone hooked up in my house. I lived in that apartment for a few months. The hours at my job were 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., so when I got home, I was usually up until the wee hours of the morning. One night, I was up late watching movies. I fell asleep in my recliner. It was summertime, and my window was open right next to me. It was nice and cool at that time of night. At around 3:30 a.m., my phone started ringing. To hell with that, I said. I was just going to let it ring until whomever it was gave up. It kept ringing and ringing. Finally, I picked it up and impatiently said, "Hello?" There was no response from the other end. I could hear that someone was there, though. I could also hear people talking like they were on the other side of the room. "Hello?" Still nothing. I was about to hang up, and a voice on the other end said, "Ronnie?" Again, I said, "Hello? Who is this?" The voice on the other end said, "I can't talk long." Then it fucking hit me. This was Kenny. I recognized his voice and I sat up in my chair, fully awake. "Kenny? What the hell? Where are you?" "Everything is okay," he said. "Where are you?" I asked again. Then he said, "Gotta go." And that was it. The phone didn't hang up. I didn't hear it click. Unfortunately, this was before the days of caller ID. I could still hear the voices on the other end of the line, on the other side of whatever room he called me from. I swore to myself that I wasn't going to hang up until I got some answers. Nobody ever came back on the line, though. I just sat there, yelling his name over and over until the sun came up. Finally, the battery in the cordless phone went dead, and that was the end of the call. I sat back in my chair and cried for a very long time. Then I fell asleep until it was time to get up and go to work. I felt better after that. I felt like there was some finality to the loss and destitution that I had been feeling since his death. I can talk about Kenny now with gladness. I can think about the good times I had with him and smile. I named my first son after him, and my brother's portrait hangs in my living room, looking across the room at my son's portrait on the wall across from his. I miss him, but I know I'll see him again someday. I am so thankful that he was my brother. Case notes, file number 139. Truly, I'm sorry for your loss. It's just heartbreaking. He was brutalized by a war that sapped the life from him. Recovering from that is often not possible. But then a little dose of humor from the Major Burden. Damn, what a name. I've heard it a few times now. When loved ones get a call from a deceased loved one, there are always additional background voices. I'm so glad Kenny was able to give you the closure that you desperately needed. The author responded to my comment, saying, "Yes, I can remember when she came into my room and introduced herself to me. She just told me her first name. A lot of army doctors aren't as concerned with rank structure and are pretty informal, especially when dealing with a potential terminal patient. She started explaining what cellulitis is and what it was doing to me. The infection was bad enough that it had gotten into my bloodstream and was getting into my organs. During this conversation, I noticed the rank in her nameplate, then it hit me. Her name is Major Burden. I mentioned it to her and she laughed and said, it takes a while, but most patients usually make the connection sooner or later. She came to check on me every day and would sit and visit for 20 minutes or so. I was in the hospital for several weeks. I remember when she came in and told me that the swelling wasn't going down in my feet, the antibiotics weren't working, and that if I had any arrangements that needed to be made, then I should do it while I was still conscious. It was scary. I was only 21 at the time. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and leave any thoughts you might have down below. I always like knowing what you guys think too.